I've had a great challenge from a GP that I'm working with, and the background to this is we're talking about how can we improve decision-making processes so that we rely a bit more on evidence and data. And the challenge back is this: I feel general practice has an overarching sense of human connection, or they can see the importance of allowing some human bias. So it's a brilliant question, this one, and one that I thought I'd just give a bit more background to. So the background driver for me with this work is this book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Can't recommend this book more highly. So to enable us to get a bit more of a context to this, because what I'm not saying or I'm not suggesting is that there isn't unbelievable expertise with clinicians and their years of experience and to a degree intuition absolutely needs to be taken into account. But here's a great example to show and highlight the issues that I am referring to. Now let's take this quite famous example. Again, this is taken from the Kahneman book. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with very little interest in people or the world of reality. He's a meek and tidy soul. He's got a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. So you know this information, and the question you get asked is Steve a librarian or is Steve a farmer? Now, most of us, our brains all work in a very similar way. Even the genius amongst us, most of our brains will jump to conclusions. So we'll see this, we'll use associations, and we'll use our System 1 brains. We'll act really quickly, and we'll come to an instant feel that this Steve is much more likely to be a librarian than he is a farmer. We can jump to conclusions that aren't accurate. So this is where there's a lot of talk about let's bring in more data, more evidence to support our decisions so we don't jump to rash decisions and poor decisions.
The point is not whether people hold correct or biased views about the personalities of librarians and farmers. It's that almost nobody thinks to incorporate information about the ratio of farmers to librarians in their judgments.
So the point made really well in the book is that, yes, we naturally feel that Steve is much more likely to be a librarian, but statistically there are 20 times more farmers than there are librarians. It's probably a bigger number than that, actually. And what we have to do is take these statistics into account when we're making these calls and making these decisions. And too often we don't even think about this. This is sort of System 2 brain working, where it checks for extra information and thinks things through in a bit more detail.
Personality is not about knowing facts. It's about recognizing which facts are relevant.
So without getting into too much mathematical and statistical theory and calculation, to try and summarise this, if you were looking more logically at the problem or the equation that we've got, you would say, okay, look, given the information we've got, which is the characteristic description, you might say that we believe that 40% of librarians would likely to have those characteristics. So if we sort of created a scale for this, you'd say, right, 4 out of 10 would be librarians. We would say maybe only 10% of farmers would have those characteristics. So you scale the farmers right down. That still equates to the chances of it being a librarian at only 16.7%. So when you if you just purely look at the description, you're really, really confident that he's a librarian. But when you take the statistical likelihood into account, that really, really changes the equation. And you don't say it's absolutely going to be a farmer. You take the two factors together, the statistical likelihood and the characteristics. You bring those two together and you generate a much more educated view of the likelihood of him being a librarian. And this sort of approach, this Bayes' theorem approach, can be used in many, many, many situations. It's a more practical approach than you first think. It can be applied in everyday decision making. And this is a concept that I really do want to help bring into mainstream healthcare so that we can practically improve our decision making processes and make it fast and efficient.